Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Writers Toolshed. If you'd like to join our writing community on Discord and get access to fantasy writing classes and books on Patreon, check the links in the description. And if you don't want to miss any future episodes, be sure to follow or subscribe. And to support the show, leave a quick rating on Spotify or iTunes and share this episode on social media or with anyone who you think may be interested. Thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the show. Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Writers Toolshed. I'm your host, Richie Billing, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the award-nominated author, Ciel Pierlot. Ciel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you very much for joining me. You've got a brand new book coming out as well in June, haven't you? The Hunter's Gambit.
Yes, I do. It comes out at the end of June, and I'm very excited about it.
It looks awesome. It's going to be published by Angry Robots, and this is going to be a second book with them, isn't it?
Yeah, this is my second book with Angry Robot. My first was Bluebird. It came out in 2022, and that was sci-fi. This one, Hunter's Gambit, is more fantasy.
Oh, nice little pivot there. So let's get start with the Hunter's Gambit, and then we can kind of work back from there and chat about your journey through the writing world. So tell us all about the Hunter's Gambit.
So it's a fantasy that kind of straddles the like romantasy line. And the basic premise is it's a secondary world fantasy. It's kind of got like Victorian Gothic vibes.
Oh, nice.
And it's all about vampires. If you don't like vampires, I'm so sorry. If you do like vampires, hello, welcome.
Yeah. You've been off the scene for a little while, haven't you? Vampires are making a bit of a comeback.
Yeah, I know they are. It's great. I actually tried to pitch this book back in 2018, and the feedback I got from agents was just, no one's selling vampire books these days. But now they're making a comeback, and I appreciate it.
Well, there you go. That's a great sort of thing to keep in mind, that it like your book might not just be like right for the time. You just wait, keep biding your time, keep trying. You never know.
Yeah, settings, tropes, they all come and go in popularity. Like, God, you sure as hell can't sell a dystopian YA novel these days.
Oh, no, yeah. So,
but maybe 10 years from now.
Yeah, you never know. Just keep hold of it. So, The Hunter's Gambit, tell us more.
So, the premise is we have our protagonist, Kazan Korvik, who is a human blacksmith. And she has always been obsessed with vampires, and she's made it her life's work to create weapons specifically designed to kill them. However, one night, she is traveling through the woods with a group of other people, and she is attacked and captured by a clan of vampires. And thus begins our plot. She finds herself in the middle of an elaborate ritual where she is put on a fake throne as a fake queen of the vampires as part of this elaborate ceremony.
Yeah.
And there's going to be this wonderful party for 3 days. Everyone's feasting and dancing and having a good time. But of course, at the end of the 3 days, she's dinner. So she has to find a way out or find a way to get revenge.
Nice.
I'm not going to say any more because you got to read the book for that, don't you?
Oh, that's set up wonderfully there. Lots going on. I'm intrigued by the romantic elements as well, given the circumstances.
There are 2 vampires who kind of maybe are going to help her. Are they? Are they not? Who knows? You have to read the book and find out.
Nice. So tell us a bit about how you approach writing this book. It sounds like you've been working on it for a good while, given that.
Yeah, so I had a first version in 2018 that I tried to sell. It wasn't a good version. Only the very bare bones structure was there. Half the characters didn't even exist or have the same names that they do now. And I totally put it aside. end of 2018, just because, I was like, yeah, okay, vampires aren't selling. And I was realizing that the book had some major, major problems. So then I wrote Bluebird, got an agent for Bluebird, sold Bluebird, and my agent had actually read the original version of Hunter's Gambit, and she was like, hey, remember that vampire book? Do you want to try and revisit that? And I was like, yes, I would love to revisit my vampire book.
Yeah.
And I basically completely rewrote it. It's a completely different book from what I tried to pitch in 2018, but the general gist is similar.
Nice.
Yeah, and then this one sold because vampires are back in fashion.
I'm sure it's all hard work that you put into it since then. Like, I imagine, I don't know how you feel like when you're writing, like you're always trying to get better, and when you write something one day and you come back to look at it the next day, there's always something that you could change, or you feel like you can do a better job now. I think that's a good attitude to have. But did that sort of help you when you were sort of polishing your story and going back to it? That like, you've grown so much as a writer because you've had those years of experience in between.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm definitely a much more skilled writer now than I was back in 2018. And even though I did most of the rewrite for Hunter's Gambit in 2022, 2023, it's still, and I've grown even more as a writer since I rewrote Gambit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely helped. There's always, I think as a writer, you're always better today than you were yesterday, as long as you just keep writing. And so being able to completely just tear it apart, recreate it, I think it turned out like infinitely better than the first version.
Nice. So how did you approach it then? Like, did you, I mean, everyone approaches like editing differently, don't they? But what did you do first to sort of work out what bits weren't quite working, what was okay? Did you get the help of someone else, or did you just go at it with fresh eyes?
Um, I sort of, oh gosh, what did I do? I think I rewrote the first 50 pages and a synopsis, and I sent that to my agent. I'm lucky in that I have a very editorial agent.
Yeah.
So my agent sent it back to me with some notes, and I went from there. I think what I ended up doing is I pretty much, I had the old manuscript open on my computer, and I basically just opened up a fresh Word document, completely blank, and
Yeah.
started the rewrite process. I sort of pulled it apart chapter by chapter as well. There were things that needed to be reorganized. There were things that needed to be restructured. A lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I sort of broke it down to the base elements of it. I was like, okay, what characters am I keeping? What characters do I need? What part of the plot works? What part of the plot doesn't work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite aspect of the oh, yeah, I suppose the aspect of the craft that you like? Do you like characters more? Do you like plotting more? What or
Um, I think there's two of my favorite parts of writing. One is when you get to the good bit.
yeah.
All plots. Well, okay, if you're a writer and you're creating a story, you know that there is the good bits that you want to write.
Yeah.
And I write chronologically. I will start with the first line of page one, and I will work my way through chronologically. I don't skip around unless I'm doing editing.
Yeah.
When I'm drafting, it's just straight through. So I'm like, okay, in 2 chapters, I get to write the good bits, and then I get to write the good bits. That's my favorite part. My second favorite part is when you find a really good song or soundtrack that fits your story and you listen to it for like 10 hours straight while like daydreaming about all the stuff you think would be really cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's an
I do that
important
as
part of
well.
writing.
It is, yeah. Like you've got to feel something when you're thinking about the story because it is an emotional journey, isn't it? And when you're thinking about them big bits, like you say, the bits that you want to write or like them climactic parts, you want to sort of feel something emotionally, don't you? When you're thinking about it in your mind. So yeah, I get that completely. That's really good. A good measuring stick of how you've done.
Yeah. I think that especially when you're going through the editing process, there's a point where everything you've written just becomes like letters on a page and it's all like
Yeah.
completely meaningless, your eyes are kind of glazed over, and you're just doing like nitty gritty technical work where you're
Yeah.
not really inspired. And then it's like, find that good song.
Yeah.
Find that good, remember why you're doing this.
Yeah. It was quite funny that you say that because I saw someone, I don't know if it was like on Instagram or something like that. And this writer was saying that when you're editing, you should never ever feel like you hate your story or anything like that because it shows that it's not going to be a good story. And I was like, that's such bullshit. Because the amount of times you have to read that story, of course you're going to hate it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there have been scenes where I've, for everything I've written, there have been scenes where I've read it like 30 times, and I'm like, oh my god, this is absolute garbage. And then I'll like send it to a friend, and the friend will be like, oh no, this is good. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh right, it has no meaning to me anymore because I've spent so long fiddling with it.
I know it's a hard thing. I mean, do you ever? I mean, I someone who struggled quite a lot with imposter syndrome. Do you ever experience anything like that yourself?
I feel like if I say no, it sounds arrogant, but
No,
kind
not
of
at all.
no. I
Yeah,
think I'm very accurately aware of where I am as a writer.
yeah,
And I think I didn't like I it sounds so cliche to be like, I worked for what I have. Because the people who say that are normally the people who didn't work for what they have.
yeah. I
Um,
get it though, because it's a lot of work that
but
you have to put in,
yeah,
and
it's
people
a
don't
lot of
appreciate.
work. Yeah, it's like, I put in the work to write a book. I
Yeah,
put in the work to find an agent. I put in the work to get a book completely ready to send off to editors. Like, I'm aware of how much effort everything was. And I think now that I have uh, one book out in the world, second book about to come out, um, I'm very accurately aware of, I don't want to say where I am in the pecking order, because I don't really think of writers. I, I think it's kind of rude to think of writers like that, but I'm aware I'm not like a New York Times bestseller. I'm aware that I'm much more like, I'm kind of at the lead title area for my publisher, but I'm aware that I have a smaller publisher. Angry Robot's pretty big in the world of science fiction and fantasy, but they're not like Penguin Random House, which is massive. So I'm kind of I'm very aware of where I am.
yeah.
So I'm not like, oh my god, I'm a failure. Everyone else is like, a New York Times bestseller, and I'm not. So clearly, I'm not a real writer. Not that it's wrong if writers feel that way, but I think because I've always tried to be very accurately aware of who I am, what I write, who I write for. I don't really get imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's good. Doesn't hold you back. And like I say, you has a brilliant career so far, and you've got every right to be confident. So you don't need to worry about those things. So, to tell us a bit more about your writing journey, I mean, was there any challenges along the way to getting here?
I think the biggest challenge was, so I actually started out writing fan fiction. And at one point, I'd written something that was like a five-way mashup between like a bunch of different media properties. And I was like, this isn't even fan fiction anymore. Like, what the fuck is this? Um, and I think for me, the hardest struggle was having that first thought of like, hey, wait, I could sell this. And then the process of getting an agent.
Yeah.
Um, all the writers I know and all the people I know who are in the query trenches always talk about how brutal querying can be. Unfortunately, that is true. Querying can be really rough because it's the first outside test you face. Like, you
Yeah.
can set tests for your own writing, you can set like goals for where you want your writing to be, but generally, unless you've hired an outside agent, which I didn't, I am a college student, I'm broke. Um, an agent is the first person who is an industry professional that will be judging your work.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to feel both like you're being professionally judged for the first time, while also being aware that this is the first hurdle you must pass through for most if not all aspects of traditional publishing.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, that's where they, I don't want to say give up, but that's where they decide it's not worth it. And I think that is a totally fair decision to make. I think a lot of people go into self-publishing because they were like, I hate the hoops you have to jump through of traditional publishing. And that's totally valid. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people, who want to be writers and who really have the dream of traditionally publishing give up at the query trenches stage because they're like, this isn't worth, the emotional pain of being told no over and over again, which again, totally fair. It sucks.
I know.
So I think for me that was honestly one of the hardest parts.
Yeah. And was it a long process for you? How did that go?
So for querying, I queried the first version of my vampire book for about 6 to 8 months, something like that. I started in the summer of 2018 and I kind of gave up at the start of 2019.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I gave up was that I'd started writing Bluebird. And I was like, moving on to the next book.
Yeah.
And for Bluebird, I didn't query Bluebird widely. What I did with Bluebird is I got really, really lucky. I had written about the first 50,000 words of Bluebird, and I took a class that was on the first 5 pages and query letter, like the stuff you have to perfect for querying. Because I was like, you know what? I don't want to write a whole book and then send it out and have it be like, this sucks. The first 5 pages aren't interesting. You don't have a good query letter. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take this class now and see if there's anything worthwhile in this book.
Yeah.
That class happened to be taught by an agent that I had pitched the Hunter's Gambit to. And after I finished the class, she sent me an email that was like, hey, when you're done with this, send it to me. Like,
nice.
This, this sci-fi book you have sounds really good. I'd be interested, send it to me when you're done. So when I was done, I sent it right to her. And she did eventually end up becoming my agent. So I didn't query Bluebird widely.
Yeah.
I went through the trenches with Hunter's Gambit and failed with that book, which I think is important to note is that you can fail in the query trenches for a book and still eventually get there.
Yeah. I remember Adrian Tchaikovsky, when I was interviewing, I asked him the same question. And he tried 15 books.
Oh, yeah.
Before as the 15th book got picked up. And
yeah, sometimes it's like that. Yeah, sometimes it's like that. And again, sometimes it's not because your book's bad. It's just because that's not what's being picked up by publishers at this point.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's also maybe you're pitching a murder, like a cozy murder mystery, but that agent already has like 10 authors that they've signed with that are doing cozy murder mysteries. They might be like, I'm not acquiring any more in that area.
Yeah.
And you might just not know that. There's a lot of stuff with querying that you don't have insight into. And I think that's also what makes it difficult, is that it can be hard to know why an agent rejected you. Sometimes you get lucky and an agent will send you a personalized letter about why they don't like it, or why they're, not interested in picking it up, which actually my current agent, when she read the very first version of Hunter's Gambit, she did actually send me like a personal letter that was like, it wasn't a form rejection. It was like, here's why I don't think I could sell this. So I think that there's, because you're getting silence, which is, no response is a no, or you're getting a lot of form rejections. It can be really hard to be like, where am I going wrong?
Yeah.
What am I doing? Because, you can be a really, really good writer. You can write, 15 really good books, but if 14 of those aren't the right book for the right time, aren't the right agents for the book, there's just so many things that can get you a no, and it can be so hard to tell what they are.
Yeah, that's what makes it so hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so sorry if any aspiring writers are listening to this. I believe in you. I know it's hard. I'm sorry.
It's all part of the game.
Yeah.
It's not a very fun game to play though.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about writing queer fantasy.
I am queer myself. I'm a very queer person. And I've always identified as queer since like, oh gosh, I want to say like high school when I was first, because I know a lot of people know that they're, you know, gay or trans or, you know, other forms of queer from a very young age. For me, I just kind of wasn't, I didn't really give a shit about dating or anything
Yeah.
until high school. And even then, I didn't really like give a shit, but I was like, oh, yeah, am I into people?
Yeah.
Big question mark. And then in high school, you know, I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I'm just, I don't really care about gender. Okay. I'm still going to be depressed because I'm in high school and not do anything about it. So I always, you know, I've, you know, as long as I've been aware of like, you know, do I want to date and stuff like that, I've known I was queer. So I've always approached writing from a perspective of trying to make queer characters as normalized as possible.
Nice.
And I think that with fantasy and science fiction, um, you know, obviously, if you're writing in present day, you do have to take into account that homophobia exists, unfortunately. But in a secondary world fantasy or, you know, sci-fi that's set far in the future or, you know, different planet or something like that, I think that one of the hard things about writing queer fantasy is deciding if you want any form of homophobia to be present in your work. And if so, why? And if not, you have to be careful to make sure that you are not writing in any subconscious biases that we have as a result of living in a society that is homophobic.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's difficult. And I think also there are points where you have to um, as well balance your own personal experience that you might want to add versus considering what readers might want. So for me, I write, you know, because I write secondary world, I write sci-fi that's like so far in the future. Um, I've always been like, you know what? I just want no homophobia. It's not a thing. You know, people are always going to have prejudices. That's just unfortunately a fact of life. But I was like, I just don't want it to be homophobia. I don't want
Yeah.
to deal with that. But I know a lot of queer writers and queer fantasy writers have dealt with homophobia and want to show characters that overcome that. And I think that's also totally fine. I don't want to police how anybody else, you know, deals with their sexuality.
Yeah.
But I think part of the challenge is making that active choice of do you want to include homophobia? If so, why and how to deal with it? And
Yeah.
then, you know, sort of, yeah, picking it apart.
Yeah. That's a really great approach to take. And so, say if someone wanted to include it as a way of sort of critiquing it, how would you recommend approaching that in like respectful ways? You don't want to obviously there's subconscious biases and stuff like that. What would you say are the pitfalls that you've seen people fall into when you've tried to like take this on?
Um, I think that a common pitfall can be assuming that the reader has no familiarity with homophobia. Because I think oftentimes, if you're a queer writer, queer readers are going to be finding your book and picking it up. And, you know, readers who are straight are also going to be reading your book. But if they're reading something queer, they probably have a general understanding of homophobia and the forms that it can take.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that oftentimes in fantasy, if you sort of spell out, like, I am discriminated against for being queer. Let me explain discrimination and why it happens. I think that that can make your novel feel like it's a PSA.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a, I don't want to use the phrase morality tale, but I think oftentimes it can come across as something that feels more instructive than as a narrative.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
but I mean, I will also say one of the reasons I've never written uh, novels where there is homophobia and characters who struggle with it is I grew up in an extremely liberal part of the world. I attended a high school that was specifically a high school for the arts, so we were all queer there. And then I have since then lived in pretty progressive parts of the world. I have not really experienced homophobia. I've been very lucky that I've just, I had an accepting family. I've had most of my friends are either queer or totally fine with queer people.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the reasons I haven't written those stories is I feel like because I haven't experienced really that kind of discrimination, it's not my story to tell.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I always like going to when I go to Fantasy Con, I always like going to the panels on representation and stuff. And there was a really good one last time. There was a bit of controversy as well surrounding a few of the subjects. Well, we'll go into that, yeah. Yeah, it's great to see more representation. But I was going to be ask you, do you think that it's getting to the stage where it's enough, or is there still a lot of work to be done?
I think that we will have enough representation when we stop thinking about representation.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
I think once we reach a point where, having like a protagonist that's like a queer black woman is so normalized that no
Yeah,
one thinks of it as representation anymore. I think
yeah,
that's when we have enough representation.
yeah.
Um, like
Normalization.
yeah, I think anytime you have to focus on it and be like, hey, maybe we need more of this? The answer is yes.
Yeah, no, you've nailed it there. I think that's the main thing to think about. And I think you said before, it's just normalization, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have you got any good books that, like good queer fantasy books, if anyone wanted to read any? Any
Oh
examples?
gosh, I actually I haven't read anything new in so long.
What are your favorite ones?
Oh gosh. I'm actually just going to recommend Jiran J. Zhao's Iron Widow because I am a big fan of polyamory in fantasy, and actually, The Hunter's Gambit has some polyamory in it. Um, and I love seeing other writers also put polyamory in fantasy because I'm just like, yes, no more love triangles. Just have them all date each other. It's fine.
There you go.
Also, it's just a great book. Check it out if you haven't already.
There you go. Good example. Last question for you. We'll always finish on this one. What advice do you have for any aspiring authors out there? Anyone who wants to give writing a go? What would you recommend?
Uh, Apart from, I'm very sorry about the query trenches. I think the biggest advice I can give is just keep writing. And I know that sounds really boring, and I know that a lot of people do have barriers, reasons why they can't write every day. Maybe they work two jobs and they just don't have that much time to like sit down every single day and write. Um, but I think for me, there was a time, like at the end of high school, um, some point end of high school, I took a gap year, so it was end of high school, middle of the gap year, um, where I started writing, and I pretty much have never stopped writing since. I write pretty much every day. The exceptions are if I'm like traveling or like something else comes up. Um, and even some days I'm just writing like one word or just like one sentence, and it's not really that productive. I think having that consistency is a lot more important than trying to go for, oh, well, every day I need to hit 1,000 words. So if I'm not hitting 1,000 words, why am I even bothering or whatever? I don't like NaNoWriMo. I know NaNoWriMo can be really helpful for some people. I
Yeah,
don't like it because I don't like the focus on word count instead
yeah.
of quality of words or focus on process. Um, I think also for me, one of the things that's been really helpful is I started writing with fan fiction. I still write fan fiction. And one of the things I like about it is there are no stakes attached to fan fiction. You can write whatever the hell you want. No one's going in and editing it for you. If you're posting it online and anyone's like, I don't know if this was very good, they're an asshole.
Yeah,
And everyone understands that they're an asshole. Like, if you publish a book and someone gives it a negative review, there's oftentimes an understanding that, because you're putting it out as a product to be consumed, people have a right to public, to make their negative opinions public. But with fan fiction, when you post something, the general etiquette is that if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So you generally just get people who are really into what you're writing and really into writing similar things. And so being able to just kind of noodle around with new ideas or new writing styles, post it to get some kind of feedback and have some kind of community, because writing can often feel very solitary. That's really invaluable. And that's really helped me. There have been days where I didn't work on a published book other than, or, a book that I'm trying to get published, for more than like a sentence, but I wrote like 1,000 words of fan fiction. And, oftentimes for me, that'll be like, yeah, you know what? I needed to just kind of dump a bunch of creative energy into something that has no stress attached with it.
Yeah.
Because, if you're trying to get something published, there's a sense of like, it has to be really polished. And it does. I don't want to lie to you. You have to have something that is incredibly polished before you start querying. You can't assume that your agent or an agent's going to take a chance on an unpolished manuscript. You can't assume that an editor is.
Yeah.
But and it doesn't necessarily have to be fanfiction. That's just what works for me. But having some kind of outlet for your writing that does not have any stakes attached to it is really important. Just to like practice. Like, artists will just draw messy sketches.
Yeah.
I'm also an artist, so I have many experience with messy sketches. There's always that, like, it's kind of like a practice that helps you get out all your ideas without feeling like you have to make it perfect.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's been wonderful chatting with you. I've really enjoyed this. Where's the best place to find out more about you and your books?
So I have a website. It's cielpierlot.com. You can find summaries for my books there. You can find links to where you can buy my books. I'm trying to get a blog up and running. We'll see if and when that happens. I also do I do some freelance editing. If you are a fantasy or science fiction writer out there who wants eyes on your book, eyes from somebody who knows what they're talking about, maybe give that a check out. Yeah.
Put the link in the description as well, so everyone can check it out.
Yeah, I'm very easy. All my social media is just my first and last name. I'm Ciel Pierlot on Instagram. I'm cielpierlot.com. I'm Ciel Pierlot on Twitter. I make it really easy for you. I promise.
Yeah. And be sure to check out the Hunter's Gambit as well. I'll put a link for that in the description. And very best of luck for the launch. Hope it all goes well. Yeah, and thank you very much for chatting again.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for listening at home. It's been a lovely chat, Ciel, and we'll speak to you soon.